Man, Adolph Caesar wasn't just an actor, he was a force. That voice could shake a room, command a scene, and leave chills running down your spine. Long before Hollywood crowned Morgan Freeman as the voice of wisdom, Caesar had already mastered that sound. Deep, sharp, full of soul. He was the kind of performer who made you feel something, even when you didn't like the character he played. From A Soldier's Story to The Color Purple, every line he spoke hit with truth and pain. But here's the wild part: for all that talent, for all that presence, he never got the flowers he truly deserved. Gone at just 52, right when the world was finally starting to notice. Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Adolph Caesar was born on the 5th of December 1933 in Harlem, New York, one of the most vibrant, culturally alive, and toughest neighborhoods in America. Harlem in those days was a paradox. Music on every corner, jazz in the air, but also poverty and discrimination that tested everyone's spirit. His mother, a housewife from the South, and his father, a merchant seaman originally from Jamaica, raised him in a household where discipline met rhythm and struggle met pride. From a young age, Caesar stood out. He wasn't the biggest kid, but he had that voice, even then, deep, commanding, like he was born with a microphone in his soul. Friends from his block would joke that he sounded like a grown man trapped in a kid's body. Harlem gave him grit, and that grit would later define his acting style. He attended George Washington High School, where teachers quickly noticed his talent for performance. While others were drawn to sports, Adolph found himself captivated by literature and storytelling. He'd memorize passages from Shakespeare and recite them with a raw power that made his classmates stop and stare. It wasn't about fancy training back then, it was instinct, emotion, and truth. But life in Harlem wasn't easy. The Great Migration had changed the city's social fabric, and opportunities for young black men were limited. Caesar saw friends get pulled into street life, but he stayed focused. Acting, for him, wasn't just art, it was escape, a way to be seen, to be heard in a world that often ignored voices like his. After high school, Adolph spent some time drifting between small jobs while searching for purpose. The Korean War was heating up, and like many young men of his generation, he joined the U.S. Navy. That experience would shape him discipline, leadership, and the ability to handle pressure under fire. It was also where he learned to project authority, to hold eye contact, to speak with intent, the same qualities that would later make Sergeant Waters so unforgettable. By the time he returned to New York, Adolph Caesar had seen life from the inside out. Harlem had given him rhythm, the Navy had given him order, and inside him burned a dream to use that thunderous voice to tell stories that mattered. When Adolph Caesar returned home from serving in the Navy, he wasn't the same young man who had left Harlem. Military life had sharpened him, his voice was steadier, his confidence unshakable. But he also came back with a deeper hunger to express himself. So he enrolled at New York University, majoring in drama, determined to turn that passion into a craft. It was the early 1950 period of time, when opportunities for black actors were slim, and the doors to Broadway were barely cracked open. But Caesar didn't wait for permission. He built his own lane. He began performing in small community theaters and off-Broadway productions, studying Shakespeare, O'Neill, and August Wilson, before most people even knew who August Wilson was. His performances were electric raw, full of rhythm and truth. He wasn't trying to imitate anyone. He brought Harlem cadence and street intensity to classical text, something few dared to do back then. Still, the industry wasn't ready for a man like him. Casting directors loved his voice but didn't know where to place him. He was too strong, too serious, too intense. Those were the very things that made him unforgettable. To make ends meet, he turned that voice into a side hustle, recording radio spots and movie trailers. His baritone soon became the secret weapon behind many blaxploitation films of the late 1960 and early 1970, booming across theater speakers with lines like, "This summer, justice gets mean." But Caesar's real artistic home was the stage. In the late 1960 period, he joined the Negro Ensemble Company, NEC, a groundbreaking theater collective that nurtured the talents of actors like Denzel Washington, Samuel L. Jackson, and Felicia Rashad. Under the leadership of Douglas Turner Ward, the NEC gave black performers a stage where their stories mattered, their pain and brilliance celebrated instead of ignored. For Caesar, it was more than a job, it was family, it was purpose. Within that space, he refined his craft, learning to balance power with vulnerability. He took on roles that explored race, identity, and the psychology of being a black man in America. Audiences noticed, critics noticed, and slowly, the industry started paying attention too. By the late 1970 period, Adolph Caesar had transformed from a Harlem dreamer into one of the most respected stage actors in New York. He had the presence of a soldier, the heart of a poet, and the voice of thunder. And soon, that combination would explode onto the screen in a role that would change everything. Through the 1970 period, Adolph Caesar was hustling like a man on a mission. He wasn't some overnight success, he was grinding, taking whatever came his way to keep the dream alive. Off-Broadway was his battlefield, and every play, every line, was another chance to prove that black stories had power. The roles weren't glamorous small parts, sometimes underpaid, often overlooked. But man, when he stepped on that stage, people felt something. His energy was undeniable, that mix of Harlem toughness and Shakespearean discipline. Still, times were hard. Between gigs, Caesar survived by doing what he did best, using that godlike voice. He became one of the go-to narrators for radio spots and movie trailers, especially during the blaxploitation boom. You might not have seen his face back then, but you definitely heard him. That booming tone, that dramatic pacing, it made everything sound epic. He could sell a movie with just a few words. In a sense, he was already famous, just anonymously so. But Adolph Caesar wasn't content being a voice in the shadows. He wanted to be seen. He wanted roles that mattered, something that captured the pain, pride, and contradictions of being a black man in America. And in 1981, that opportunity finally came. That year, the Negro Ensemble Company premiered A Soldier's Play, written by Charles Fuller. The story explored racism, self-hatred, and identity within a segregated World War II Army unit. It was intense, complex, and deeply human, everything Caesar had been waiting for. He landed the role of Sergeant Vernon C. Waters, a tough, tormented man whose internalized anger becomes his downfall. And let me tell you, man, he didn't just play that role, he became it. On stage, Caesar's presence was magnetic. Every glare, every line dripped with authority and pain. Audiences sat in silence, hanging on his every word. Critics called his performance explosive, haunting, a masterclass in power and fragility. For Caesar, this was validation, years of hard work, finally paying off. The play won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama and later the New York Drama Critics Circle Award. For the first time, Adolph Caesar wasn't just that voice from the trailers, he was a name people remembered. Hollywood started knocking, and Caesar, after decades of being underrated, was finally stepping into the spotlight. When word spread that A Soldier's Play was being adapted into a film, Adolph Caesar knew this was his shot, the kind that comes once in a lifetime. Hollywood had a habit of recasting stage actors for marketable names, but this time, Norman Jewison, the director, made the right call. He wanted authenticity. He wanted the real Sergeant Waters. And there was no one on this planet who could deliver that better than Adolph Caesar. Filming began in 1984, under the new title, A Soldier's Story. Caesar reprised his role alongside a young Denzel Washington, Howard Rollins, and David Alan Grier, a powerhouse cast of rising black talent. But even among them, Caesar's performance stood like a monument. Every time he walked into a scene, the air changed. His voice cut through like a blade, commanding, fierce, and full of buried pain. What made Sergeant Waters unforgettable wasn't just the rage or the authority. It was the tragedy behind it, a man so scarred by racism that he began to project it onto his own people. Caesar understood that duality on a soul-deep level. He played Waters not as a villain, but as a broken man, desperate for validation in a world that refused to give it. It was acting on another level, raw, layered, and real. When the film hit theaters, critics lost their minds. A Soldier's Story received glowing reviews and went on to earn 3 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Supporting Actor for Adolph Caesar himself. It was history in the making, a stage veteran, finally standing toe-to-toe with Hollywood's best. Even Denzel Washington, who would later become one of the greatest actors of his generation, often credited Caesar's performance as a masterclass in discipline and control. Caesar wasn't just acting, he was channeling something. You could feel decades of frustration, of being overlooked, of watching others get the recognition he deserved, all poured into that one role. After the film's success, Caesar's phone didn't stop ringing. He was finally getting movie offers, interviews, respect. He had become what so many called him later, the Morgan Freeman before Morgan Freeman. And for once it seemed like Hollywood was ready to give him the flowers he had waited a lifetime for. But man, just when things were about to reach their peak, life had one more twist waiting. By the time A Soldier's Story hit theaters in late 1984, Adolph Caesar had gone from stage veteran to Oscar nominee almost overnight. For years, he'd been the man behind the voice, the powerful presence few could name but everyone could feel. Now, finally, the world knew who he was, and they couldn't stop talking about him. Hollywood executives were calling. Directors wanted that same energy, that same fire. But Caesar wasn't the kind of actor who just showed up and read lines. Nah, man. He studied a role. He broke it down, lived it, breathed it. Every movement, every pause, every glare meant something. He brought truth to every scene he touched. Then came another call, this time from Steven Spielberg. The project? The Color Purple, 1985. It was based on Alice Walker's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, a deep, painful, yet uplifting story about Black life, resilience, and self-worth. Caesar was cast as Old Mr., the stern, cold father of Danny Glover's character, Mr. The role was small, but like always, Caesar made it unforgettable. When The Color Purple premiered, audiences were stunned. Even among legends like Whoopi Goldberg, Oprah Winfrey, and Margaret Avery, Adolph Caesar's scenes left a mark. He brought that same emotional honesty that defined A Soldier's Story, that ability to make you love and hate a character at the same time. Viewers felt it. Some said they wanted to punch the screen, others said they couldn't take their eyes off him. That's power, man. That's art. Critics praised his consistency, noting that even in limited screen time, he commanded attention like a general on the battlefield. His deep, gravelly tone carried authority not just in words but in presence. For Black audiences especially, Caesar's performances hit close to home. They saw their fathers, uncles, and neighbors complex men, broken by life yet clinging to pride. By 1985, Adolph Caesar was finally standing where he'd always belonged among the greats. He was doing interviews, attending premieres, being recognized on the streets. That Oscar nomination for A Soldier's Story had made him a symbol of excellence, proof that stage-trained Black actors could dominate in Hollywood too. And yet, despite the applause, Caesar remained humble. He wasn't out there chasing fame, he was chasing truth. He often said, "The work speaks louder than the man." That was his creed. So there he was, 52 years old, a late bloomer finally basking in the spotlight, with new film deals lined up and more scripts on his desk than ever before. After decades of struggle, rejection, and quiet perseverance, Adolph Caesar was finally getting his due. But fate, as always, has its own timing. After The Color Purple, Adolph Caesar should have been everywhere, starring roles, big contracts, magazine covers. But that's not how Hollywood worked back then, especially for a Black man in his 50s who didn't fit their safe, marketable mold. Even after an Oscar nomination, Caesar found himself boxed in, offered roles that were either cold authority figures or men on the edge. It was the curse of being too real. Hollywood admired his craft, but didn't quite know what to do with it. Still, Adolph Caesar never stopped working. Between film sets, he continued doing what had sustained him through the lean years' voiceovers. His baritone was in demand like never before. If you went to the movies in the 1970 or early 1980, chances are you heard him without even realizing it. He was the unseen narrator behind countless blaxploitation trailers, films like Cleopatra Jones, Superfly, Truck Turner, and others. His delivery made even the roughest storylines sound like Shakespeare. That voice could make danger sound elegant and power sound inevitable. He was so respected in that world that many in the radio and trailer industry called him the voice of Black cinema. He even lent his tone to public service announcements and commercials, balancing the line between art and survival. Adolph once joked, "If I can't be the face of the story, I'll at least be its voice." Despite the admiration, he could feel the limitations pressing in. Hollywood still saw him through a narrow lens. The serious black actor, the angry sergeant, the intimidating presence. But those who knew him off-set described him differently: calm, witty, humble, and deeply reflective. His friends from the Negro Ensemble Company said he was the type of man who'd pull younger actors aside after rehearsal and say, "Make them see you. Don't wait for permission to be great." That's the thing about Adolph Caesar, he never chased the spotlight. He just demanded it respect him. And even when the roles didn't match his worth, he poured everything into them. He used his platform to open doors for others, to show that theater-trained actors could redefine film performance. In early 1986, Caesar began working on another film called Tough Guys, alongside Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas, two Hollywood legends. It was supposed to be his next big leap, a chance to show range beyond the hardened roles he was known for. Everyone on set said he was in top form, sharp, professional, funny, even playful between takes. But beneath the surface, years of stress, long workdays, and quiet exhaustion were catching up to him. He'd fought for recognition his whole life, and now, just as it arrived, his body was starting to push back. By 1986, Adolph Caesar was finally where he'd always wanted to be respected, working with legends, living the dream he'd chased for decades. But behind the applause and the film lights, the grind had taken its toll. Years of constant work, long hours, and the emotional weight of carrying heavy roles had worn him down. He was known for his discipline, that soldier's mindset never left him, but even the strongest armor cracks under pressure. Hollywood was a strange place for Caesar. On one hand, he was being recognized as a master craftsman. On the other, he was still fighting stereotypes that limited how far a black actor could go. He'd spoken privately to friends about how Hollywood often wanted the black voice, but not the black truth. He could narrate their stories, but rarely star in them. That quiet frustration sat heavy on him. While working on Tough Guys, Caesar was surrounded by two of the biggest stars of the Golden Age, Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster. For younger black actors, seeing him on that set meant something, a symbol of progress, of breaking through the invisible ceiling. He was bringing Harlem, Broadway, and the Negro ensemble spirit right into mainstream Hollywood. But man, no one realized how fragile things really were. During filming in Los Angeles, Caesar reportedly complained of chest pain but brushed it off. That's the kind of man he was: stoic, focused, never one to make a fuss. He'd been through tougher days in the Navy, tougher crowds in Harlem theaters. A little pain wasn't going to stop him now, not when his moment had finally come. Then, on the 6th of March, 1986, during a lunch break on set, Caesar collapsed. The crew rushed to his aid, and paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Adolph Caesar had suffered a massive heart attack. He was only 52 years old. The news hit the film community like a shockwave. Fans couldn't believe it, the man with the strongest voice in Hollywood, gone just like that. Denzel Washington called him a teacher to us all. Members of the Negro Ensemble Company wept. One of their finest had fallen right as the world was learning his name. For so many, it felt unfair. After years of struggle, after finally earning his flowers, fate had stolen the bouquet. When news broke that Adolph Caesar had passed away on the 6th of March, 1986, the shock was immediate and deep. Hollywood lost one of its most commanding voices, and the black artistic community lost a pillar, a man who had carried the dignity of stagecraft into film and made it unforgettable. It felt unreal. How could someone who seemed so larger than life, so powerful in presence and voice, be gone just like that? Tributes poured in from all corners. Norman Jewison, who directed A Soldier's Story, said Caesar's performance was one of the most truthful portrayals of a man at war with himself ever put on screen. Denzel Washington called him a master teacher, remembering how Caesar guided younger actors during rehearsals, showing them the discipline of the stage. Members of the Negro Ensemble Company gathered in New York to honor his memory, reading scenes from A Soldier's Play and sharing stories about the man who had pushed them to greatness. Fans around the country sent letters, flowers, and messages to his family. Many said the same thing: "I didn't know his name until now, but I always knew his voice." That summed it up. Caesar had touched millions even when his face wasn't recognized. His baritone had filled theaters, radios, and living rooms for years, and now that silence felt deafening. The press called his passing a loss of monumental talent. The New York Times described him as an actor who gave more than his roles required. In black newspapers, writers emphasized what his journey symbolized: a man who had risen from Harlem's concrete streets to Hollywood's highest honors without ever compromising his art. At his funeral in New York, fellow actors, veterans, and fans gathered to pay respects. There was sadness, but also pride. People spoke about how his success had opened doors for others, how he proved that stage-trained actors could command the screen. Even those who had never met him felt connected, because his performances carried a raw truth that spoke to the human condition: race, pride, pain, survival. For the entertainment world, Adolph Caesar's death was a wake-up call. It reminded everyone how fragile life is, and how easily true talent can be overlooked until it's gone. His name faded from headlines soon after, but those who knew his work kept his memory alive. They remembered that deep voice, that piercing stare, that honesty he brought to every role. And for many, his legacy was clear. He may have left early, but he left complete. Even after his passing, Adolph Caesar's influence continued to ripple through film, theater, and voice work. You couldn't talk about powerful acting or iconic voices in American cinema without someone bringing up his name. For those who studied the craft, he became a reference point, the standard for authenticity. His performances weren't just good acting, they were lived experiences. In the years that followed, his role as Sergeant Waters in A Soldier's Story was studied in acting schools across the country. Professors would replay that interrogation scene, his eyes, his posture, his control, and say, "This is how you build tension with truth." Caesar showed the world that power didn't come from shouting or overacting. It came from conviction. That lesson still echoes today in the performances of actors like Denzel Washington, Lawrence Fishburne, and Jeffrey Wright, all of whom have credited stage discipline as the root of their power. Caesar embodied that philosophy long before it was fashionable. In the voiceover world, his legacy is just as huge. Before the age of computer-generated trailers and celebrity narrators, Caesar's voice was the sound of movie excitement. He made trailers feel like events. Decades later, professional voice artists still cite him as a pioneer, a man who brought theater-level storytelling to a medium most treated as background noise. That deep, textured voice became a blueprint for authority and drama. More than anything, Adolph Caesar's journey symbolized representation and persistence. He broke through at a time when Hollywood rarely gave serious dramatic roles to black men. And he didn't do it by conforming. He did it by commanding respect. He made people see the humanity in characters others would have dismissed as stereotypes. He carried Harlem, the Navy, and the entire Negro Ensemble Company on his shoulders, and in doing so, he helped carve out space for the next generation of black actors to thrive. When you listen to Caesar's performances today, they still hit raw, honest, unapologetic. You feel the same tension, the same pride, the same fire. That's what legacy really is, not just memory, but impact that doesn't fade. For a long time after his death, Adolph Caesar's name drifted quietly through the corners of Hollywood history, remembered by purists, but unknown to many casual movie fans. Then, years later, something unexpected happened. The digital era brought him back. Through social media, YouTube retrospectives, and streaming platforms, a new generation stumbled onto his performances in A Soldier's Story and The Color Purple, and they were blown away. Clips of his most iconic scenes began circulating online. That piercing monologue from A Soldier's Story, where Sergeant Waters' voice trembles between pride and pain, or his cold, commanding moments as Old Mister in The Color Purple. Viewers filled comment sections with the same reaction. "How did I not know about this man?" And, "He was way ahead of his time." The rediscovery was emotional. It wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition delayed. YouTube channels like Celebrity Underrated helped revive that conversation, highlighting Caesar's work and giving context to his journey, the voiceovers, the theater years, the grind. Fans started calling him the original Morgan Freeman and the voice that shaped an era. Younger actors and creators began studying his performances for their honesty and restraint. Even film students started writing essays about his contribution to representation in American cinema. On TikTok and Twitter, users posted side-by-side clips comparing Caesar's intensity to modern actors, marveling at how his craft still felt fresh decades later. His legacy reached audiences who weren't even born when he died, proof that truth in art doesn't age. And the films themselves? A Soldier's Story and The Color Purple remain timeless. Every few years they find new life through anniversary screenings, remasters, and academic discussions. Each re-release reminds audiences that Caesar's work wasn't just good, it was necessary. It told stories that reflected both the wounds and the pride of a people determined to be seen. What's beautiful is that the rediscovery didn't come from studios or awards. It came from the people. Fans, historians, and digital storytellers brought his name back into the light. That's poetic, man. Because even in death, Adolph Caesar proved that truth will always find its voice. Looking back now, it's hard not to wonder what if Adolph Caesar had lived longer. What if he'd gotten just a few more years to build on that momentum from A Soldier's Story and The Color Purple? Would we be talking about him today in the same breath as Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, or James Earl Jones? Because man, the talent was there, the discipline, the depth, the presence. Everything about him screamed, legend in the making. When you watch his work, even now, it doesn't feel dated. There's a modern honesty to it, like he was playing for an audience 50 years in the future. He didn't act to impress, he acted to reveal. Every glare, every pause, every drop of sweat on his face carried meaning. That's rare. It's what separates great actors from immortal ones. Adolph Caesar's style came from that bridge between two worlds, stage precision and street realism. He could shift from Shakespearean delivery to Harlem swagger in the same sentence, and it never felt forced. That's what made him dangerous in the best way. He didn't fit into the boxes Hollywood loved so much, and maybe that's exactly why he never got his full due. He wasn't marketable, he was real. It's crazy when you think about how much he accomplished in such a short span. From years of off-Broadway plays to national acclaim, from voicing movie trailers in the shadows to standing under the bright lights of the Academy Awards, that's a lifetime of artistry packed into just a few decades. Most people spend their entire careers chasing one iconic role. Caesar had at least two, Sergeant Waters and Old Mister. Both left scars on audiences that still ache when you rewatch them. The tragedy, of course, is that he left right when things were getting good. Hollywood was finally evolving in the mid-1980 period, slowly opening doors for black actors to lead serious dramatic films. Caesar would have thrived in that wave. You can imagine him in roles like Glory, Malcolm X, or A Few Good Men. He had that gravity, that quiet authority that could fill the screen without ever raising his voice. But maybe part of his magic lies in the mystery, the brevity of his career, forcing us to cherish every frame he left behind. His story reminds us that being underrated doesn't mean being unseen. It means your work mattered more than your fame. It means you changed people, even if the industry didn't give you a statue for it. So yeah, maybe Adolph Caesar didn't live long enough to become a household name. But in a way, he became something deeper, a symbol of integrity, excellence, and artistic truth. He proved that success isn't measured by how many films you make, but by how many hearts you move. And that, man, that's the definition of legendary. Adolph Caesar's story isn't just about talent, it's about persistence, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to keep showing up when nobody's watching. He didn't climb his way to fame overnight. He earned it, inch by inch, through decades of work that most people never even saw. And maybe that's what makes his legacy hit so hard today. He represents every artist who gave everything to their craft but never got the credit they deserved while they were alive. When you hear that voice, that booming, gravel-deep thunder that could silence a crowd, you realize he was never really gone. He's still here, echoing in every actor who learned to deliver truth with restraint. In every trailer that tries to make words feel monumental. In every story that demands its audience feel something real. The beauty of Adolph Caesar's journey is how it still inspires long after his passing. Young black actors study his scenes not just to mimic his delivery, but to understand what authenticity looks like. He proved that you could be powerful without shouting, emotional without weakness, poetic without pretense. He taught a generation, and the ones after that truth is the highest form of performance. When fans rediscovered him through social media, it wasn't because of hype, it was because of substance. His art aged like soul music, timeless, human, and raw. People from every generation, every background, hear his lines in A Soldier's Story and say, "Man, that still hits." That's the mark of something eternal. And yet, there's still that ache, that question lingering in the air. Why didn't the world celebrate him sooner? Why did it take decades for people to realize the brilliance that was right in front of them? Maybe it's because true greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes, it speaks softly through discipline, through depth, through the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was. So here's the truth. Adolph Caesar was never forgotten. Not by the fans who saw A Soldier's Story opening weekend. Not by the actors he mentored on stage. Not by the family who still remembers the man behind the myth. And definitely not by those who understand what it means to be underrated, to give everything and still be overlooked. But now, through time and technology, his name is rising again. People are watching his performances, learning his story, and saying his name with pride. And that's the justice he deserved all along. So as we close this story, let's honor him properly, not with silence, but with gratitude. Let's remember that art isn't about fame, it's about impact. And Adolph Caesar's impact? It still shakes the room. He might have left us too soon, but his truth, his voice, and his legacy live on.